Without further ado, I'll pass over to Emma to kick us off.
Hi, everybody. I guess you can hear me okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for the introduction, Ignatius. Sorry that you had your FKD disturbed.
No, it's okay.
I'm sure it was very interesting. Yeah. Nice to not see, but see a lot of names here on the side. I have imposter syndrome, partly because I don't identify as a punk scholar, and also it's quite a while since I've actually researched punk. So I don't know about you, but I would completely understand if people would rather be hearing Bortan speak, because I certainly would like to hear from Bortan. Yeah. I just learned about this band this morning. Rather than me, I am what my friend calls an old fart. But what I'll be doing today is talking a bit about that book, which I did the research for in the 1990s. So hopefully a bit of historical perspective might at least be a little bit interesting for people. And just think a bit about what's been happening in one of the Bali punk scenes that I know a bit about and I researched about in the 90s. It's not the only one. It's the commercial punk scene. And just think about how that's been kind of forged and some of the factors that have contributed to, shaping that, the use of the word punk, I guess, to describe, some of the things that have been going on there lately. And how can we understand that? I might just share my screen because I have some photos that I can show. Just find them. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, I lost my
Your cursor?
No, it looks like I lost my title.
Ah, okay.
For some reason. See if I can get it back. Oh, it's there. It's not showing though. Let's bring it down a bit. Can you see that now?
Yep.
Cool. Oh, it's gone again. Anyway,
oh.
the title is how can we understand something like this? I think how can we understand the different ways that different punk scenes have sort of developed in different parts of Indonesia? Because before I prepared this little talk, and I won't go on for long because I know it's late in the day and everyone's been sitting down the whole day, and so we don't want to sort of delay too long. I was reading some of the more recent studies about Bandung punk. There's some articles recently published by Sean Martin Iverson, who I don't think is at this conference, unfortunately, because I think he's said some interesting things about punk in Bandung. Also recent pieces by Indra Hikmawan Saifullah about Hijrah punk, and also Jim Donaghy about women in the punk scene in Indonesia. And just reading those, because I haven't been working on punk for a while, it got me thinking about how different the punk scenes are in different places, and thinking about, what are the factors that are shaping punk in different ways. The other thing I did was watch the Vice video documentary on the Aceh punk scene, which shows a different side again of punk. Can you guys see my face, or you can just see my screen?
I think we can see your face.
You can?
Yeah.
Okay. So this opening slide, this is the cover of the book that was published out of my research that I did in Bali in the late 1990s, in which I looked at basically three groups of amateur musicians playing reggae, punk and death metal respectively. And I was interested in how they used these genres of music to think about and take apart what it meant to be a young Balinese man at the end of the 1990s. And so today I'll focus on some of the things that I was thinking about with relation to punk at that time. Oh, there it is. There's my title. One of the things that I was thinking about was the broader context that was behind the emergence of this underground scene in Bali. So the underground scene came to be populated by both punk and metal musicians, as many of you know. And in a lot of the stuff that's been written about the underground scene in Indonesia, it's often located against the backdrop of the demise of the New Order regime, at the end of the 1990s, as a kind of alternative or accompaniment, I guess, to the student activism that was gathering pace around that time, calling strongly for the resignation of Suharto. And of course, as part of that as well, there was a lot of things happening within the PDI, the emergence of the PDI Perjuangan, after there was government interference in that party, installing a compliant leader, and then Megawati Sukarno Putri emerging as leader of the PDI Perjuangan. This had a lot of impact in Bali, which had been a Golkar stronghold for some time, but in the late 1990s became very pro-PDI Perjuangan. This is kind of one of the backdrops, indeed, of the emerging underground scene in Bali, as it was, the background to the underground scene in Indonesia generally. There's some other things going on as well that I noted at the time that sometimes get a little overlooked, but equally interesting, I think, and that is changes within the way that rock music came to be understood at the end of the 1990s. This slide shows an image on the left of young men who were arrested at the Metallica concert in 1993 for trying to get into the concert without having tickets. And you can see they've got punk-style hairstyles. And they were very much considered by the authorities to be threatening. And, similar to the way that, I don't know if any of you guys were in Jeremy's talk this morning, but someone raised the question of street punks and crime. And so many of these people who were arrested, these poor young men who were trying to get in without tickets, were depicted by the government as people who were a threat to the social order. And that was wrapped up with the way that rock came to be understood as threatening. And, as a consequence of that, rock concerts were banned for a few years after the Metallica riots. And then in the late 1990s, we see something new happening, which is that there's changes in the policies governing how major recording labels, international major recording labels, can invest in Indonesia. And by the end of the 1990s, they're allowed to invest directly, so set up shop directly. And you see things like concerts, bringing US bands here, easily getting permits. So this image on the right is a photo from the Jakarta Alternative Pop Festival, which was held in 1996. And there were 3 US-based alternative groups that came out to play there. They were Beastie Boys, Sonic Youth, and Foo Fighters. And Indonesian bands that supported them, they were Netral, Pass, and I've forgotten the other one. And there was also in the same year a Green Day concert. So we saw in the end of the 1990s a kind of move to depict rock in new ways, as something to be celebrated, as something that was fun, as something that middle-class kids could enjoy. Whereas before it had been associated with lower-class youth who were threatening. So this was another kind of context that informed the ways that Balinese people were engaging with punk at the end of the 1990s. And a third sort of stream that was feeding into the ways that people were thinking about what punk could mean and what it could do in the Balinese context was this emergence of what I call a regionalist discourse. So a movement, a broad social movement, which was questioning the way that tourism development was unfolding in Bali, the role of Jakarta-based capital in tourism investment in Bali, big capital development of resorts and so on. And so what we saw as the new order was, crumbling, and as support for the PDIP was increasing in Bali, we also saw people generally, not just underground musicians, voicing a concern with the nature of tourism development and the role of Jakarta-based big capital in determining the pace of development and the style of development as well. So a big social movement emerged around the building of a golf course next to a famous temple. Some of you might have been to Tanah Lot. That golf course is still there. The people who were opposed didn't succeed in getting it stopped. So this cartoon on the left here is making fun of the idea that, if you're a poor Balinese farmer, that you could play golf while you're waiting for the harvest. And obviously the one on the right is depicting, I guess it looks like a white guy who is, taking all the fruits of the tourism spoils, while again the poor Balinese farmer gets very little. So this is another context that sort of fed into the ways that people were thinking about what punk was and what it could say, and how it could help people think about what it meant to be young and Balinese at the end of the 1990s. Some of you might have read this book. I did. It's I think it's a really useful book, especially if you're looking at places where things like where subcultures are emerging in contexts that are complex. So as I've just argued, Balinese punk wasn't just a part of the demise of the new order. There were other things going on. There was new forms of media, new sounds coming in that people were engaging with, and also also new ideas about what it meant to be Balinese as tourism development was changing. And this book, which is about subcultures, actually post-war British subcultures, but also discusses punk. I found it useful for me because the author, Dick Hebditch, talks about punk as a working class response to or taking a part of both not only the dominant commercial consumerist culture, but also the parent working class culture. So dealing with, addressing in a way shortcomings in different kinds of dominant discourses, not only consumerism, but also the kinds of discourses about what it meant to be British and working class in the 1950s, 60s and 70s. And punk helped to take that apart and help young people to take that apart and question it and find new ways of being. So I think this framework was useful for me because I started to identify ideas about what it meant to be Balinese as similar to, or as occupying a similar position within the young Balinese punks' lives as pre-existing ideas about being working class did for the British punks. And similarly, there was also emerging discourses of consumerism that they were contending with, engaging with, taking apart, embracing as well. So this is the posters for two of the concerts that happened in 1996. And I've put them here just to emphasize again that, yes, Balinese punk emerged as the new order was, crumbling and, towards at its very final days. But when I was doing my research in 1996, the mood was very optimistic, as if there was something that was beginning, something new that was beginning. And that was, that optimism was emerging from the new kinds of music that people were being exposed to because, now you had this sort of deregulated environment where international major labels were coming in and promoting their products in Indonesia directly, thinking about setting up branches in Jakarta, which of course they subsequently did, not only to sell their own products, but also recruit local bands. And so many of the punks that I spoke to in the late 90s had been, or not many of them, some of them had been to the Green Day concert. Actually, I didn't talk to any who had been to the Jakarta Alternative concert, but people were playing this music. They were playing it, on the street. They were playing it acoustically. They were playing it at gigs in electrified form. Green Day was huge. And so people were excited about that. And, they wanted to play with these forms of music. They wanted to dress up in the ways that these people were dressing up. And they wanted to reproduce the sounds as well. So what you see here is some photos of people doing that. Another thing that happened in the late 90s was that more and more people started to get access to electric guitars or electrified instruments. So that meant that people were no longer limited to, rendering, say Green Day songs on the street with acoustic guitars, but they could play this kind of music in new ways and to new audiences, because amplification, of course, allows you to reach more people in different spaces as well. And so what people did was they got access to material resources. You can call electrified instruments and material resources to reproduce these sounds that they were getting access to in new ways. And they were experimenting with new places to play with these sounds or to perform these sounds and also to consume them as you can see on this is actually people headbanging, so not strictly punks, but nevertheless part of the underground scene. And so, you know, now people could do this because they had the spaces to do it and the instruments to do it. So yeah, and seeking out different places to jam, you know, to gig. And you see here, this photo is from a jam that happened in Kuta every Saturday night, where people would just come and play, and people would start dancing as well, just outside. It was kind of a semi-built shop front that was actually owned by the parents of the drummer of Superman is Dead. And people would gather there, started gathering there around 1997, I think, to, you know, experiment with these new sounds and these new styles of performing them. So just to refer back to the different kinds of ways that punk has developed in different places. And it sort of leads me to think about really what is punk then, if it develops so differently in different places. You know, we can see in Indra's work, in Hikmo and Saifullah's work, we see people coming together around the idea of punk to articulate certain ideas about what it means to be Muslim. In Sean Martin Iverson's work, we see people experimenting with DIY communities, I guess. And in the case of the Achinese punks, people using punk in a way to come together as people who have been affected by this tsunami. Many of them had lost parents or all of their family members even. And, you know, using punk to as a form of solidarity, I guess. In Bali, I think the story is a little bit different, but nevertheless, still an idea that expresses in very general terms something that is alternative to the dominant discourse. So that's probably what all of these scenes have in common, is that punk is being used as a way of marking out this alternative, this very general alternative to the dominant discourse, right? So I guess the Muslim punks are, you know, have this discourse of Muslims are somehow underprivileged, you know, they inhabit an economy that doesn't serve them well. And in the case of the DIY communities in Bandung, the idea would be that, you know, the consumerist capitalist system is kind of an other. So they're developing other kind of socioeconomic communities. And the punkers in Aceh are obviously setting themselves in opposition to religious discourses in Aceh. So in Bali, what you see, I think, is punk also as an alternative to dominant discourses, but that alternative being articulated very much as a regionalist discourse rather than something that lays out any kind of alternative to consumer capitalism or alternative ways of organising collectively. I don't think you really see that in Bali, at least the sort of commercial punk that I know. What you see rather is use of punk to mark out a way of being Balinese that is different to whatever dominant kinds of Indonesianness are being articulated out of mainstream media institutions coming from Jakarta. And this has been very much the idea of punk, I think, that's been articulated through this band, Superman is Dead, which has sort of gained a monopoly, I guess, on the meaning of Balinese punk because of their early commercial success. So, you know, they've gained a lot of exposure in the Indonesian media and also the international media as, you know, the Balinese punk band since signing to Sony Music in the early 2000s and, you know, touring overseas, and also some of the activist work that they've been doing more recently. Now, why is that, you know, this punk as regionalist discourse has been the thing to emerge in Bali, as opposed to, you know, punk as alternative DIY, you know, forms of collectivity that experiment with ways to do things differently to mainstream consumer capitalism, or, you know, other possibilities that have been sort of articulated and experimented with in other parts of Indonesia. I don't really know the answer to that, but I think it's interesting that actually in Bali there are collective fora, or there are forums where youth get together, and this is actually where the underground scene began, or where a lot of the metal bands began gigging, in local community youth groups. And that's in the context of an institution in Bali known as the Banjar. Some anthropologists have done work on these kind of collective forms and noted how they resist state intervention, how they promote collective ways of organising, how they can be supportive of anarchic ways of thinking. So it's kind of interesting that those institutions were not the ones that amateur musicians, punk musicians, underground musicians looked to when they were seeking to set up alternatives to the sort of dominant mainstream media institutions that, you know, were articulating sort of and celebrating the virtues of Jakarta-based consumer capitalism. What happened was, I think, more a system of patronage. And so as you see here, and I mentioned it before, you had this punk jam emerging at somebody's house. So the community became quite dependent on this one person and the material resources to which he had access to, which is understandable because those material resources were located in Kuta. This guy Jering, who's become quite famous as you know, but one of the most famous Balinese punk musicians because he's quite outspoken, he's in the media a lot, had this whole shop front, and, you know, people started to gather there, and later he opened up a bar as well. So rather than collective, devolved, shared forms of organising, you see gathering happening around these sort of spaces that are owned by a particular figure within the punk community, and people becoming sort of reliant on the material resources that that particular figure can provide. This is quite speculative, actually, so anyone who wants to take me up on that, feel free. But, you know, I think that the basis for that community, like, that is where this band, Superman is Dead, amassed a lot of their fans, having access to the material resources. They were able to put on gigs. They had a lot of people oriented towards them. They were able to expose people to their music. And that's, you know, basically how you get major label recording deals, right, by showing that you have a lot of fans, which they did. I've forgotten the year. I think it was 2000. They cut a major label recording deal with Sony, and started to talk about this deal as something that was in line with punk ethics, because they'd been one of the first bands that had been able to stipulate the language that their songs were going to be in. So they negotiated a deal that allowed them to have 70% of the songs in English. And so this kind of deal was, articulated by them and their manager as one that was quote unquote punk, because, it showed how they were able to maintain their autonomy, I guess, which is autonomy being a sort of key word in the way that punk is being articulated in the Balinese context. What we then see is, of course, the development of this kind of idea of punk, which settles on this one band as a kind of brand that articulates all these ideas about Balineseness and Balinese autonomy, which is not bad. It's proposing an alternative centre of media production, I guess, which is interesting, but also would probably wrongly be identified as an alternative to consumer capitalism. It was very much a good example of consumer capitalism. What we see is like not only the band articulating these ideas, not only this sort of musical sound, musical performance, but also being articulated through merchandise, which is a clever way to make money if you're a musician, but not a collective DIY kind of cultural production, more of a profit-oriented kind of cultural production that, is owned by one particular figure. And then later, what's interesting, I think, is the emergence of this band as a kind of voice of Balinese resistance, particularly in relation to this social movement called Tolak Reklamasi, which is a movement that has, gathered a lot of steam and is opposing the development or the reclaiming of part of Benoa Bay to build some islands and different kinds of developments there. And so that's an environmental movement led by environmentalists, and the NGO Walhi plays a big role in that. And this band has been very vocal in opposition. A number of other musicians have as well. I think the model of resistance or the model of political outspokenness is interesting if we look at the historical sort of basis and also the economic basis of it, because as I was saying, this sort of celebrity is really based on profit-oriented consumer capitalist institutions like the merchandise brand, that's owned by one particular person who claims the profits of that, and then also uses 10% of those profits to fund the environmental organisation. Yeah, so it's a kind of philanthropic sort of model as opposed to the kinds of DIY punk collectivist models. And just thinking about, this is my last slide, but yeah, so just thinking about why this particular mode or particular articulation or definition of punk emerged in this particular context. I think we can think about, that model of patronage that that the punk scene started with, and how that affords certain people power and voice, and also shapes the direction of a movement in particular ways. I'm going to stop talking now. I've probably said enough. I hope some of that was intelligible, perhaps controversial.
Okay, thank you. You've done?
Yes, I am. Should I stop sharing?
It's up to you.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Emma, for the wonderful presentation. And now I'm letting the audience to ask the first 3 questions. Is there any questions? Anyone? Okay, if there's still no question, I think I want to ask you. Is it okay?
That's a good moderator. Ready with your question in case someone doesn't ask.
Okay. You said that in 1996, the mood was optimist. I want to ask you more. I ask you more about the context back then. What actually made the optimistic feel besides other international recording company that came to Indonesia that time? Beside Infestation and another music company that already bombard with American music that you said in your interview with Rizky. Is there any different context that make the mood was optimistic back then?
I guess, but my response to that would be that most of the people that I was talking to who were involved with, you know, broadly the amateur scene, even the reggae musicians actually, because they, they were also getting, so what you had was a tourism boom, basically. You had a tourism boom because the tourism industry was opened up to investment as well. And this was what was causing people to worry because, you know, there were things happening like all of a sudden you had golf courses being built right next to temples, which is not great for a number of reasons. And also, you know, there's all these problems with water and a whole lot of things. But nevertheless, you know, these things are always like complicated, and it's not like people didn't make money out of it either. So I think one of the things that was happening then was you saw, of course, one of the things about Bali that people don't know a lot about is that there's quite a high level of poverty, but the people who I was talking to were not poor. They had land, and you could all of a sudden sell your land for a lot of money. All of a sudden, like the price of land just like rose up. And so one of the things that you saw was that kids started to buy these toys, that were like, you know, these electrified instruments, and they started to commune with each other in new ways and, you know, play some of this new music they were listening to. So I guess they were on the right side of the tourism boom. Didn't mean they weren't critical of it. Yeah, if you want to sort of take a political economic reading of it, that would be my reading. But I think, yeah, that's what it is.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I will let the audience ask to Emma. Is there any question? First 3 question, please. Anyone?
Everyone is tired. What's the time there? 5:30?
Yeah.
6:30, yeah.
Anyone? Okay, I think I'm going to ask you another question, Emma. Is it okay?
Go for it.
Okay. You said that Pong is articulated regionally, and you only examines that Pong is articulated regionally in Bali, right?
Mm.
Have you seen another articulation in different region in Indonesia?
I haven't personally studied it, but I think have you seen the Aceh film about the punks?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, that's a regional reading, isn't it? Because they're saying they're linking it to the tsunami.
Yeah.
I don't know how. I mean, do you agree with that? Maybe you have a different reading.
Yeah, I think so because it's specifically articulated in that specific region, right? And what interesting is the context that make the Pong itself is articulated regionally in is what have to I say? Do you want to add more?
I mean, I guess it's just it's only one way that you could read all these different ways that punk has developed. There might be other ways, yeah, right. So we know that there's all these different forms of punk, right?
Yeah.
And you know, there's commercial punk, and then there's US punk, and that's different. Like Jeremy was saying this morning, to English punk, and so you know, one of the ways to understand that historical development is look at some of the regional factors that were at play. But there are other ways, I guess, you could understand it, possibly. You could think about, yeah, I mean, perhaps well, this is still a regional reading, I guess, but you know, in some places there may be a kind of more living, although submerged, discourse of class discontent. So you get things like the band I was hearing about this morning, this Bortan.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So how would you explain the emergence of Bortan? Yeah. Is that drawing on some sort of historical lineage in that particular area?
Yeah, politics.
Yeah. Or yeah. Why don't we see that in Aceh?
Hey, Asmil, show up.
Do you want to ask a
sorry,
question?
I was tuning in.
Hi,
Sorry.
Yeah.
Hello. Yeah, I didn't turn on camera. I had kids around.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, I see.
So, okay. Actually, I got a question, actually. It's interesting that the conversation, when I got back in and you're talking about region, I understand Indonesia is huge. And, you know, I'm from Malaysia, by the way. Apa khabar? Orang seberang.
Yeah.
The culture politics of, let's say, the region is also quite interesting because I talked to punks in Malaysia, and of course in Malaysia they look up to the larger punk bands, and I think if you're talking about the working class subculture, probably Marginal is still like, the archetype. But there's also been friends who in the scene would say that, a lot of Malaysian bands are kind of, I wouldn't say afraid, but intimidated, especially punk bands going to Indonesia, because lebih keras. They say that, the
Yeah.
Indonesia,
More
yeah.
heavy.
So, Malaysia,
Oh,
Malaysia seems like Malaysia is a middle income country, and
okay.
I think there is, and of course there's all these larger things. The history of Malaysia, Indonesia, the history of Ganyang, Malaysia, all that stuff. So people are afraid, generally afraid. Not many Malaysian bands or artists cross over, but recent years, like me and the singer-songwriters, the folk guys, we've been penetrating your Java, especially we toured the place. But what I find very interesting is the nature of regional politics in terms of national politics, right? And I'm just curious, how much does that inform, let's say, Indonesian the punk mental landscape? Because I understand, because Indonesia is huge, and you within yourself, right? And every time, like when the folk guys we were touring, we're very clear. We're not going to like, yeah, let's win, let's break through Indonesia. It's never there. It's more like, let's go there and cuma say, apa khabar semua? Yeah, we exist. There's we're from Malaysia. But very few bands cross over, because it can be intimidating. One is definitely because the scene is within Indonesia is enough. Is large enough. So I'm just curious, to what degree does even the national, because when you're talking about regional, just now was within Indonesia, but outside of Indonesia, how much does that come into the picture? Because, like I said, the Indonesian imaginary is huge. I remember first time going to Jakarta, seeing your Indonesia map. Well, okay. So I'm just curious to know, from what, when you on the ground, like when they talk about punk, yes, there's always the Western soccer archetype trying to follow. But has there been any articulation of just not consciousness, but awareness of other regional punk scenes among Indonesian punks? Is that present?
Ask the punks. You're not asking me, are you?
I'm asking you and anybody here.
I think it's interesting the way that they're, some of these, I've got an echo now. If you tour Australia, you tour the US, it's very much celebrated. But why not to Malaysia? Why wouldn't that be celebrated? I don't know. To Japan. Do you make a lot of it when you tour Indonesia? Like it's a really great thing.
We want to. I mean, it was years in not planning, but just finding other people like-minded. I find that a lot of musicians. This is my own personal feeling. Malaysian, whether you're indie or underground, I feel not many have the guts to kind of get out of their comfort zone. A lot of jago kampung lah.
Yeah.
So, but I understand Indonesia is a very different thing, because you don't need a proof to go out. You playing the different cities is I would say enough, but it's gratifying, right?
Yeah.
Whereas like place like Malaysia, it's people are waiting things to happen. God knows in Singapore even that's even a different sort of mental space. So that's a question I never really got. I did ask when I was touring, just of course, again, we're not on the radar lah, generally speaking. So that's humbling and it's important to know, I think. So I've always been curious. Maybe I mean Any of you could just respond to that. Just
I
curious.
think for the metal scene you are, aren't you? Is that right, Ignatius? Malaysia has been an important sort of source of materials for metal. Yeah? No?
Yeah.
Yeah, metal, kind of noted for the metal here. I think Indonesia tried to follow Malaysia is renowned for rock kapak, right? The sort of very scorpion based. At least that's one thing that the Malaysian form is unique for. But again, that also comes with its own contradictions. Only now in Malaysia, the conversation, recently there was a rock kapak symposium in Ipoh, north of KL. Yeah, it was the first time they had it. So it's only now the kind of discussion. And what I always really find inspiring about in Indonesia, is that there is conversations at this level. I mean, today when I logged in the morning, it was great to see like 200 people, and I look at locals. That's great. I think that's really great. So not really a question, but maybe I'm just giving props to you guys, and like in terms of, let's say, keeping the machinery of the mind working. I think if in Malaysia people who use their brains, they kind of like take Indonesia as a good example. Just wanna kind of like reach out lah, olive like reaching out to you guys to say that, like, look, Malaysians, we listen in to Indonesia, and especially what's the kind of stream of research, and it's not so much a question anymore lah, but it's just that I want to kind of really cute. I love what's been going on today.
Is there anyone want to respond to statement by Asmil? Or is there anyone want to ask Emma? I think everyone is already tired now.
I think so. Is everyone following the whole week?
No, I didn't think so.
I could only follow this because
because
here we're just
right?
finishing. Yeah, not time, but so much. Just been busy with we're wrapping up the semester.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
Okay. I think we finished now.
Thank you for your questions. Sorry for being an imposter.
And thank you, Asmil, for chipping in.
Sama-sama. Pleasure.
Yeah. Nice.
Thanks for your moderation.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, you know what? I think that's it. And now I want to close this session. And I think we have to ask Nurul. Hello, Nurul.
There's Nurul.
Hello, Adit.
Hi.
Thank you very much to Mrs. Emma Baulch for the presentation. It's very interesting. And thank you very much to Mr. Adit for the presentation. Okay, to all of the audiences, please go back to the main room because we have last performance by Somagora and closing ceremony delivered by Mr. Fahran Ramadan as the PSN Indonesia organizer. So don't go anywhere and stay tuned with us. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.